you. All right. Welcome everyone. We're starting right on time. Welcome everyone to the second session of the inaugural seminar series at the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. My name is Lisa Myers, and I'm an artist and a curator and an assistant professor here in the faculty at York University. This conversation series is part of my grad class, a course called Food, Land, and Culture. So I'll say hi to all my students that are here. This is the second of 5 conversations that we're hosting this fall semester, and we will also have 4 more in the winter. So I'm really excited about this. And those winter ones will focus more on art, but it'll be food, gardening, art. There's lots of kind of intersections there, lots of practices that happen. I want to start by letting you know that I'm talking to you from Toronto, traditional territory of numerous Indigenous nations. I want to say thank you and give acknowledgement to the Anishinaabe, Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and want to also keep the Michissauga or the Mississauga of the credit as, mention them as the caretakers of this North Shore of Lake Ontario. So that's my brief acknowledgement. I encourage you to think about and acknowledge the places that you're transmitting into this digital zone from. And if you don't know who the traditional territory you are residing on, I encourage you to make that effort, do some work, and find out. Thank you to, I want to thank a bunch of people. I want to make sure I do these things, but I want to thank my colleague, Dana Prieto, in particular. Together this past summer, we conceptualized this speaker series, and we worked hard on it to figure out what we were going to do and what the themes were going to be. So I want to thank Dana Prieto, who's an artist and educator and our research associate with the project Finding Flowers. That looks at ecology, art, and pedagogy. So Dana, do you want to briefly introduce yourself here so that people can know who else has made this happen?
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody. As Lisa said, I'm Dana. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation series and have been honored to work with Lisa on it. And I am really thrilled to have Priscilla and Leticia Ama today. We've been thinking about their work very deeply with Lisa, and we, as Finding Flowers, we are inspired by their steps and their practice, and how they have worked and they continue to work in between disciplines, in the intersections of disciplines and different practices. And in particular with Finding Flowers, we're interested in the intersections of food justice, environmental justice, arts and ecology, and their work has been guiding us all along. So I encourage everybody to look more of their work, learn more about their practice, and I'll leave it back to you, Lisa, and the speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. So Dana and I, as I said, work on this project called Finding Flowers. And we also work with Dr. Sheila Kola, who is an ecologist and biologist and studies wild bee pollinators. And together we think about plants, art, ecology, and pedagogy, as I mentioned. So I just wanted to acknowledge Sheila as well, because she encouraged this to happen as well. Also, one other thing I want to make mention of and I'm thankful for is the funding from the Faculty of Environmental Studies, the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change, New Frontiers, and York's Sustainability and Innovation Fund. That makes it possible for us to make sure we have the funds to do this. So this series, I also want to, this series, Miijim, Food as Relations, was conceived as a, this idea of Miijim, or this word Miijim, it's Anishinaabe is the title and overarching theme for this series, and has informed and inspired sort of all of the speakers that we invited and all of the sessions. And this word Miijim, its meaning relates to reciprocity and offering. It translates, loosely as food, but it also, if you take apart the parts of the word, I was taught by a language speaker from Chiminising, from Christian Island and Beausoleil First Nation, Jeff Meneg, about this word. And he's going to come next week and talk more about that and explain it from his perspective as a language speaker. So that word's really been a guiding light to me from the time of, cooking cooking in community to now and being here with you all. This series started on October 6th, 2 weeks ago, with a conversation on Indigenous food sovereignty with Don Morrison, Sherry Pictou, and Tanya Willard. The coming weeks will show more examples of how self-determination manifests in thinking about sessions and thinking about food. And the session on learning from Minoman is next week on October 27th. So that should be, I'm really quite excited about that. And the session on Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe food systems is on November 10th, a couple of weeks after that. And then we're going to end the series November 24th on the topic and with speakers talking about migrant workers and food justice. So check out our Eventbrite for more information about that. Now I am thrilled and so happy to thank our conversation participants, our speakers today. Today's theme is Black and Indigenous Food Relations, and our conversation will consider intersections of food justice and security, climate change, and many more things. This will, of course, take in consideration the current COVID context that has revealed, multiple injustices and have had rippling effects within and beyond Indigenous and Black communities. But our conversation is going to start here. The conversation will also share the strengths of working in solidarity across communities. And so our speakers, we're going to have a couple presentations, one from each of them. And then after we're going to break into a conversation, and then we will have time after that for some questions from you. We're going to start off with today. Joining us is Amma Deawuo. I forgot to ask you that in the tech.
No worries. Deawuo.
Deawuo?
Deawuo, yeah. My people love your vowels, so.
Deawuo. Okay, I apologize. I was going to ask you that in our tech check and I forgot. Deawuo. So Amma Deawuo works at Black Creek Community Farm, and she's going to talk about her personal researches around food history. Also work at Black Creek Community Farm, obviously. And we also have Cree scholar, Dr. Priscilla Settee, and we're going to be able to hear about her work in climate justice and Indigenous food sovereignty. I'm going to read their bios here. Amma Leticia Deawuo is a longtime resident of Jane Finch community and mother of 2 children who has been leading social activist work in Jane Finch area of Toronto and across the city of Toronto for the past 14 years. She is the director of Black Creek Community Farm, situated on 3.2 hectares of pristine farmland, surrounded by 15,000 square meters of woodland. Black Creek Community Farm is an integral part of the northwest section of Jane Finch neighborhood in Toronto, Ontario. As a community resident and organizer, Amma has been absolutely instrumental in development and formation of a number of prominent community groups and initiatives, including Jane Finch on the Move, Jane Finch Action Against Poverty, Jane Finch Political Conversation Cafe, Black Creek Food Justice Network, Mothers in Motion, and so on and so forth. So there are more. Amma also worked as a community development worker with Jane Finch Community and Family Center for many years. So Amma is a recipient of the Errol Institute Canada Community Food Hero Award. She is a member of the Toronto Food Policy Council and is the chair of Seed Change, formerly the USC Canada, and is currently a part-time instructor with George Brown College. George Brown is so lucky to have you, fortunate. Okay. This is Emma, and then I'm going to read Priscilla's, and then we'll go on to the presentation. So Priscilla Settee is a Cree activist for Native rights, women's rights, and environmental rights from North Saskatchewan, and a member of the Cumberland House Swampy Cree First Nation. Dr. Settee is an award-winning professor in the Department of Indigenous Studies at the University of Saskatchewan, and a member of the, and around the globe. She works in Saskatchewan and around the globe. I lost my way for some reason. Oh, I see. It was repeating. Okay. She is a member of Seed Change Canada Board and a David Suzuki Fellow, 2019-2020. She works in Saskatchewan and around the globe in a number of capacities, including serving as a board member of the Cultural Conservancy in California. In 2008, Settee was awarded a Global Citizen Award by the Saskatchewan Council for International Cooperation and was twice nominated for a Teaching Excellence Award by her students. That's great. Settee received the University of Saskatchewan's Provost Award for Teaching Excellence in Aboriginal Education in 2012 and the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Award for contributions to Canada in 2013. Her latest book is the co-edited volume, Indigenous Food Systems. Just one second. I'm plugging it. Oh, that background's not working. Okay, I'll get rid of the background later and show it. Okay. And so Indigenous Food Systems, Concepts, Cases, and Conversations, 2020. She published The Strength of Women, Akiyem Mawak, 2011, and Pamatsuin, Global Indigenous Knowledge Systems in 2013. So a lot of books happening. In 2013, Dr. Settee directed and co-produced a video on Indigenous food sovereignty with local filmmaker Marcel Petit. And that is the bios and so much information about the wonderful guests we have. We're going to start with Amma, though. And I say that though because I should have done the bios opposite, but I didn't. So Amma, I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much for putting this together. I'm excited and nervous at the same time for this conversation, and also super honored to be, doing this alongside my colleague, Priscilla. And I say colleague lightly, because I think if I had the opportunity, I would literally just be coming here to listen to her talk about her work and some of the amazing work that she's doing as well. So thank you again. I'm gonna try and share my screen. There may be glitches, just give me 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen to kind of guide my portion of the conversation. So 1 second. Okay. I'm guessing everyone sees my screen. So I shared this screen. So just to talk a little bit, I don't know how many people know about the Black Cree Community Farm and the work that we do there, but we are an 8-acre farm situated in the heart of the Jane and Finch community. We run multiple different programs and services. Before the Black Cree Community Farm, actually, on this property, there used to be the Toronto Urban Farms, which was headed by a Black gentleman named Solomon Boye. And I think it's really, really important that I mention Solomon Boye's name, because in terms of a lot of the community gardens work, and specifically in terms of this particular land and kind of getting the land set up and ready for BCCF, how we were able to kind of take this on and do that work, has all really been him and the youth that he also worked with. So the Toronto Urban Farm was actually a fully funded City of Toronto project. And unfortunately, funding were cut to that. So, back to 2005, 2006, the summer of the guns, Toronto Region Conservation Authority, along with the city of Toronto really was looking at developing this farm as a youth strategy and as a youth recreation program. So back in 2009, and probably many people do not remember this, but a heart and stroke study found that the Jane and Finch community pays about 7% more for fresh produce in comparison to other neighborhoods across the city. So think about a community that faces multiple systemic barriers, also paying high amounts of food, of money for food. And really, I think carrying Washington's term, food apartheid, is what really describes the situation within Jane and Finch. So a highly predominantly Black, people of color, high immigrant neighborhood facing multiple systemic barriers. So housing, job security, and policing, also paying more for fresh produce as well. So in terms of the farm, it was really, the initial idea was to make it into a high production farm, to grow vegetables, to sort of look at how we can meet some of the needs of people in the Jane and Finch community. Of course, we do more than just that now. A big focus of our work is really providing outdoor environmental education as well for children who live in our community. So, and also demonstrating what sustainable agriculture can look like, especially, you know, when we think about the fact that 60% of the world population live in urban centers, and many people are very far removed from their food system. So having a farm like this is really, really important in terms of demonstrating biodiversity and demonstrating what that could look like, and also bringing together multiple different stakeholders to look at the issue of food justice and food security and what it means. Of course, when we talk about food and we talk about food issues, we cannot forget housing and how the role of housing. So where you live, if you live in Rosedale, the level and Rosedale, for folks that are not from Toronto, is a more affluent neighborhood in the city. So when you think about for folks that live in Rosedale and the type of access to jobs that they have, the type of access to food is very different in terms of when you think of a community like Jane and Finch and what we have access to. And most importantly, the quality of the food as well that you find in some of these grocery stores. So for an instance, why is it that we have police in dominantly racialized Black neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods, but then when you go to a more affluent, dominantly white neighborhoods, you're not going to find undercover police or even security guards at the gate. And your level of experience in terms of access to food, you know, is fresher. There's a deli session, maybe, you know, they have multiple different things. But then when you come into, let's say, a No Frills in Jane and Finch within our community, you know, there's the security bars, and then there's a security officer who will be at the end of the cashier as well. So that gives you an idea of the Black Cree Community Farm. I know I didn't name all the programs and activities that we do, but we do grow vegetables, and we are an organic farm, and we try to sell our vegetables to folks who live and work in the neighborhood, also making the farm a farm park. So for instance, if you see the trail systems that are around the farm, so that folks can also come for a walk in our trails and enjoy the outdoor space for free. The other part that, and I'm trying to figure out how to go next on my slide, 1 second. The other piece of work that I want to talk about is my work with Jane Finch Action Against Poverty. We started, I think this is our 12th, October 17th was our 12th year anniversary, as a group of community residents with some organizations together to really look at, you know, in the past, as community residents, whenever, let's say October 17th, which is the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, will come along, we will organize a bus and we would take community residents to Queen's Park and to do some demonstrations there. But we really wanted to find a way to look at and raise awareness around some of the issues within our own community, and also bring different residents together so that we can tackle some of the issues ourselves. So hence the birth of Jane Finch Action Against Poverty. A lot of our work has been focused around, at first we were working with OCAP, the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, around the special diet. I don't know how many people remember the special diet program, which was a program that will give a little bit of extra money to folks that are on welfare so that they're able to meet their dietary health needs. And unfortunately, that was one of the programs that was scrapped by the government. So a lot of the work that we did was really looking at some of that, and also looking at the minimum wage campaign as well, and doing some work around that, looking at the Save Our School program, which we organized with other community organizations, and we were able to actually save one of the schools in our community that was slated to be closed. And also doing work around police brutality and police violence as well within our community. So there's actually an event that we're organizing, Jane Finch Action Against Poverty is organizing tomorrow with the Decent Work and Health Network. You know, really, and I think this is why I love this title, Our Lives Over Profit, and looking at the challenges that folks are facing in light of COVID and employment and job security as well. The other piece of work that I'm going to touch on has to do with my grandmother. My grandmother raised me from when I was pretty much a baby. Growing up, I believed she was my mother until I was told much later who my mother was. But she's a woman who really has inspired me in terms of the work that I do now. And when I think about our ancestors and also Indigenous knowledge, is really going back to some of the teachings and some of the learnings from her. So one of the research project that I'm working on right now is really looking at Black and Indigenous elders and how they use small-scale agriculture to really support their families and their communities. Why is this important? Because a lot of times when we think about farmers, right, most of us have a picture of a white male who is sort of what we're used to. This idea of the old MacDonald had a farm, right? It's the white guy with the red barn and some animals. And I really want to tell the story, not in any way to glorify small-scale agriculture in any way, but to really tie it into climate change, some of their memories, some of their learnings also from their family, and how they use agriculture, even through patriarchy, and to also highlight the issues around land access for women globally as well, and to also highlight the issues around climate change and some of the challenges that's facing the town that I'm from as well. So I think my time is probably up. So I'm going to leave it there and hope to have a much fruitful discussion as we go. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. It's really great to hear about the work you're doing there and advocacy. You know, it's such an important part of what it sounds like you're doing. And thanks for hearing about your research. So now we're going to hear from Priscilla. Are you ready to go, Priscilla? You're on mute, just so you know.
There. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with all my colleagues that I know and don't know. And I'm going to quickly just move right into the presentation about some of the work that I do in the academy and in the community. So as was mentioned earlier, our latest child is a book on Indigenous food systems that I co-edited with my dear colleague from the University of Winnipeg, Dr. Shailesh Shukla. And it's a collection of 15 stories that really give hope to what is happening on the Indigenous food sovereignty front all across Canada. So we finished that book this past year, and we are both using it in courses that both of us teach, or we teach separately, on Indigenous food sovereignty at our respective universities. So some of the work that involves is like really bringing an awareness of the importance of food to all of us, how food is really a connector, how it has the capacity, I believe, to unite us in foundational and exciting ways. Sorry, I don't know how to shut my phone off, but you know, it really has a capacity to help us make linkages with partners that and allies that we may not have thought of ourselves in partnership with before, to address the business of food insecurity, and to really rise to the powerful forces, corporate largely, that influence food production as it is today. But even before that, although that is a really important part of our food sovereignty work, courses such as these that we teach on campus and in the community is to talk about what are Indigenous contributions to foods, because we never learned that growing up. We didn't realize that, you know, Indigenous people really represents this rich knowledge base of the majority of the world's foods. So we're never credited with that knowledge. We're never compensated. But instead, on the front lines, we find ourselves actually fighting for our intellectual property. We find ourselves pushing back against powerful scientific forces of patenting our knowledge. And, you know, the great lessons I've learned from my colleagues around the world is that, you know, this represents life on Earth. If we don't get it right this century, you know, we know that we're losing millions of species in a year, millions. And it's, you know, these kind of stories that have really pushed me to become more vocal and to become more active and to lean on my employer in ways that they probably don't like. And, you know, I for one, suffered greatly in doing a PhD in agriculture because I wanted to look at the forces of domination in the food production area. And honestly, you know, they failed me in my comprehensive exams, and I wasn't allowed to talk about that. So we need to realize that at the same time that those of us who are in the business of knowledge creation and writing history for once and for all, is that we are also met with this great resistance within the academy at times. So that's part of the struggle in this food sovereignty struggle, Indigenous food sovereignty struggle. Furthermore, these food systems that enrich our communities and feed us and support all life are the reflections of powerful Indigenous values, ones of Wahotowin, which means we are all related. We are all related, whether you look like me or whether you look like Amma, or you know, anybody else. That we are bound by these powerful relationships of belonging, of Dematsawin, the beautiful, the good life. I had written an entire book on that, which are reflected in Indigenous knowledge systems that reflect the relationship and care for the natural and human world. And capitalism, we must name it, has done everything in its power to destroy those relationships, that beauty of our natural cultures. So we also lean on the important work of scholars like Sarah Carter, who really documents how Canada purposefully undermine the integrity and the sovereignty of our communities by putting in places powerful barriers that forbade us from really producing food, and then blaming the consequences of failing crops to us rather than them. And then during these times when Canada was being built as a nation, they wrote the laws, they undermined the role of women, they destroyed families, and all of this had a residual impact on who we are today. So our families were torn asunder, women's knowledge and role in community were undermined through legislation, but also through direct means like rape and other really horrible relationships, the stealing of our children, which has become a national disgrace to the government of Canada. And we are now picking ourselves up and going through the remnants of a strong and powerful culture, a rebirthing almost, because these never died, even though the state tried to enforce these relationships of power and control over us. It never worked. We are as strong as ever. And women have a really important role to play in that. In fact, all over the world, the stories we hear coming out of groups like La Via Campesina are powerful stories, as Amma pointed to her granny, whose knowledge base was absolutely essential as she was growing up as a child, and we all have these stories. So the importance of allies such as Sarah Carter and those of you on this webinar are really important, and we can't move forward without these important relationships. I mean, it's harder to move forward. So we in food sovereignty work, we acknowledge, the history, what it did to us, and we use it as a platform to talk about the great acts of resistance that are currently in place at the very cost of people being impacted by genocide for their political beliefs, for standing up for water, for standing up for forests, for standing up for saving our seeds. And if we just take an internet search, we'll find these powerful documents like the Nyalini Declaration at the International Forum of Food Sovereignty in Mali, West Africa, similar ones done by Indigenous Latinx communities out of Atitlan, the Declaration of Atitlan. And so all of these documents speak to what the state is doing to the land. And these are powerful connectors for all of us to see our commonality and also, and more importantly, the commonality of our pushback strategies. We mustn't get so isolated and so discouraged by what's not happening. We have to spend every day celebrating the inroads that we are making. And believe you me, we are making them so powerful. And certainly this webinar is a prime example of that. Almost done. We know that, Indigenous people are responsible for 3,500 plus varieties of potatoes and 610 of oca and 1,500 varieties of quinoa. And I mention this because at the same time that this happened or this exists, there are the forces of monopolies, powerful seed monopolies that are doing everything they can to undermine our knowledge. So we need to be informed of that. And of course, like Indigenous Food Sovereignty is a really good place to explain that to young students who really need to be aware of that. So in my community for the last 10 years, I've been teaching about that. I've been very active globally and nationally, internationally on what people are doing on the ground and how to support them. So a number of my board commitments do exactly that through the Cultural Conservancy, through Seed Change Canada, through the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Very important that our new learners and our scholars are really equipped with this knowledge so they know how to go forward into the future with strong informed policies based on you know, what we know, like we've lost so many species of every plant that we enjoy today, like literally from hundreds of varieties, species of these, you know, things like radishes, peas, muskmelon, lettuce, sweet corn, all of that are quickly being diminished. So we have no time to lose. You know, in the world where I've worked, I've seen such beautiful, like these 2,000-year-old batat rice paddies in the Philippines that were threatened with genetic modification. And the people of the Igaro people in this region of the Philippines stood up and said, no, you will not genetically modify our rice, because we know that hundreds of rice types have been modified, the golden rice being one of them. And so we support traditional small farmers, indigenous farmers, and women in their pursuit of keeping their crops non-GMO. Finally, on the front lines, we continue to stand up to the terrible things that are happening, the dams, the mines, the clear cuts, the oil exploration, the toxic dump sites, the nuclear bomb tests, the military installations. For all over the world where I've traveled, I've seen ruined traditional harvesting, hunting, and fishing communities, whether it's Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, or whether it's here in northern Saskatchewan, where our province has given the last clear-cut rights to a foreign government from outside of our territories, and to clear-cut every last tree. And now we've got incidences of large animal coming into the city because we've ruined their homelands. So in closing, I want to say that the conditions out there, we're all aware of, the impact of climate change on our forests. California is burning, the Brazilian rainforest is burning, and now COVID. Like, this is symptomatic of a system that has gone wild with so-called development, and it's come home to roost. And so we sit in our little computer boxes and we continue to teach, we continue to build relationships and networks, because we have no time to lose. It is incumbent on all of us that we find out what each other is doing so that we can really strengthen our pushback strategy, because Mother Earth is really crying for that. So I want to thank everybody who's been on this webinar, and I want you to pick up a copy of the book and read about, the hopeful stories in our new book. And I want you to begin and continue the really powerful work of relationship building, for it is at the heart and center of what needs to be done if we are going to win this challenge on food sovereignty. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who's listening, and thank you to the young women who've organized this webinar. I am so grateful. I'm done.
Miigwech. Thank you, Priscilla. Can everyone hear me? Thank you so much, Priscilla. Thank you for saying I'm young also. I wanted to hold this. I like it. Yeah, maybe Zoom's very flattering, and by the end of this, maybe if I stay on Zoom forever, I'll stay young. Okay, I just wanted to hold up the book and let you know that this is 2020. It's brand new, and I think I've read it, and I have it we're using it in my class too. So it's such a valuable collection of different accounts and different case studies, and from a range of perspectives. It covers a lot of First Nations perspectives, and so I'm so happy that it exists. So I think I really also thank you for sharing what you said today. So many of the words are really resonating with me, and I am almost want to pinch myself being here with you and Amma, because back in 2006, I went to the Indigenous Food Conference in Saskatoon, and I was a cook, and I ran a garden, and I went there and I presented there, and so seeing you there and then being here today is very special. So I have to acknowledge that. It's so your work has been really important throughout my work too. I think you came at you mentioned this, you're talking about climate change throughout your talk, but this real appeal to us as all the people here is really important. So I think I'm going to just start with a question to get things going. And so in this edition, this collection of essays, in your essay in that collection, it's around climate change and Indigenous food sovereignty. You mentioned the hurricanes in the Caribbean at the time of writing. This is something that was happening at that time. And pointing out how important it is for the media and all of us to recognize extreme weather as part of climate crisis. And you state that climate change does not obey jurisdictional boundaries between tribal, private, state, and federal lands. And I really appreciate how you're addressing climate change with this global look at its effects. And I want to ask this question for both of you. What do you consider to be the key actions and collaborations that need to happen in order to address climate change on local, national, and or international realms? And thinking about the little things that we're doing, and maybe even I guess we have a global perspective, but then what is it we do in our everyday that we can that can contribute, if you wouldn't mind, just to get things going here. Oh, you're just muted. You're muted still, sorry.
I want to point to my colleague's work, Amma, at Black Creek, as a really powerful example of how communities can pay attention to the local and address the international. I think that these kind of efforts help to build community, help to utilize the knowledge, and address something called food justice. Food justice is a really important aspect of what is needed in Canada today, whether it's talking about human rights of the predominantly Black workers and brown workers that produce the daily foods that Canadians have on their plates, that we have to see ourselves linked to that as whether we support the workers in that regard, or whether we will continue to buy California iceberg lettuce, which is also a related issue. It's not that the workers down there have separate issues, but I think, like for myself, we're talking about local economies. I'm teaching presently a course on local economies as we speak. And, one of the things that we've lost in the fight for food sovereignty is sovereignty of our own communities, women's sovereignty, family sovereignty, the ability to direct and make transparent the decisions that are made in our backyards. And that, to me, is what Amma does in her work. And we do similar actions in our communities locally, like establishing community gardens and really growing them in community. But then there's also the larger issues of, intellectual property rights and saying no to genetic modification and foreign ownership. So it's all about food justice. And it's about reinvigorating the tremendous loss of biodiversity that we're responsible for through the developmental practices of particularly the governments in the North and the West. So on the backs of so-called developing nations. And ultimately, if we look at the impact of these developmental policies, these are the reasons behind the great change in the climate. Whether it's the tremendous winds we're experiencing, or the pollution of water, or the floods, or the fires, they are all related and point right back to the method of development. So the kind of work that Amma and others, and many of you around the webinar are doing, are really signs of hope.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Priscilla. And one thing that I can add to that as well is really looking at, the development aspect, right? Like wherever you turn in Toronto, there are more condos going up every single day. More condos, we're clearing more fertile land that could be used to actually grow food is being used to build empty condos are really, it's mostly, most of them are sitting pretty empty right now. And I think that, work like the work that Black Creek Community Farm is doing, yes, is bringing people together and is growing food to add to our local food system. But I think most importantly, it's also protecting our floodplains and protecting the watersheds, which I think if we are to have a resilient city and we are to look at mitigating climate change and looking at floods, the city of Toronto, we've been having floods when it rains. These are all parts of the problem. And I think really looking at restoring the land and really planting a diversity and bringing back some of the native trees and shrubs and things that we've lost as well is another way of restoring that diversity and also mitigating against climate change. So for instance, at the farm, we've planted some things like pawpaws and some Saskatoon berries as well. And we also have, different pollinator gardens, and the method of farming that we're doing is really ensuring that it can really support that rich ecosystem that is there and can help in the long term. And when we talk about food justice, yes, we're talking about the injustices that exist, but also looking at what's it called? I can't even remember the term right now, but really looking at environmental racism as well, and gentrification and urban planning and how certain neighborhoods are situated the way they are. And then other neighborhoods may be able to deal with the shocks of the wild climate that we're having, and then other neighborhoods were not set up in that way to be able to deal with the shocks of that. So really, a big piece of the work that we're trying to do is really look at how we can demonstrate that, and also work with other groups in their own neighborhoods to look at how they can build perennial gardens within their neighborhood to really help in a small way as well. I wanted to touch, like, for an instance, growing up in my village, one of the things that, and part of what is also inspiring most of this work is that there used to be an abundance of food, an abundance of different birds, different snakes, sort of different things. And now, because of deforestation due to mining, and a lot of that companies are not necessarily companies there, but they're also companies from the West that are going into these countries and destroying the environment, destroying the water systems, and literally just then leaving like nothing ever happened. So, and how that has an impact, a huge impact in terms of their own, building their own food sovereignty. So now you become very reliant on things like, Brazilian chicken, which I didn't even know was a thing, but that Brazilian chicken is put through ship from Brazil all the way to the African continent and also in the Caribbean islands, and is sold at a cheaper rate. So if a small farmer is trying to sell chicken from Ghana, he's having a hard time now being able to sell that, because now we haven't flown in chicken. So I think those are all important pieces to kind of connect what's happening locally, but also with what's happening globally, and how, like Priscilla said, they really interlink as well.
Yeah, and those are what the last sort of case that you mentioned about shipping in chicken. It really points to the economics, like the sort of global economics that manifest and then affect local economies, right? I love that. I love to hear about the pawpaw being grown, and I'm really conscious of, that makes me conscious of some of the collaborations that are happening at, well, I don't know if they're collaborations or if it's just opening up certain spaces for collaborations between Indigenous and Indigenous artists and of different communities. So I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that, and maybe if you wanted to talk about that a little bit, Amma, any kind of food justice initiatives that are working in solidarity, your communities you're working in solidarity with.
Yeah, so the Black Creek Community Farm, really, I think the work of really pushing the farm to be a community farm and doing work around food justice, we know that we cannot do that work without really looking at the land and our relationship to the land. So as Black people whose bodies were exploited and used to really cultivate the land in this parts of the world, it's really, really important that we also connect with and work with Indigenous people around Indigenous food sovereignty and also Black food sovereignty. At the farm, one of the first steps that we've taken is working with Sweetgrass Collective to develop a Three Sisters garden and also to support our medicine wheel garden that we started last year at the farm, and also to learn about different ceremonies as well, and also for the farm to grow. Of course, we don't want this to become just a program or a project or something that's sort of siloed, but to really look at how we can connect and work together to embed Indigenous food sovereignty and Black food sovereignty in the work that we're doing at the Black Creek Community Farm. So like I mentioned, this is sort of like the very, very first step of the work that we have ahead that's coming. We have 16 community allotment plots actually at the farm, which is focused on BIPOC folks. So we have folks from Syria to Jamaica, Grenada, Colombia, all farming and doing your own gardening on site as well. And one of our partners too that I have to mention is African Food Basket. When African Food Basket started in the city of Toronto, there weren't many groups, if any at all, really doing work in low-income racialized neighborhoods. And for me, even growing up as a young person, they were the first group that really started that work in looking at Black food sovereignty and what that means within the city. And at a time too, when it wasn't quite sexy to sort of do so, and required, it was a concept that was very new for a lot of people, but really paved the way for the work that we're doing and the work that other folks are also doing as well within the city.
Thanks. That's a really great. Do you have any thing to add about Priscilla? If you have any thoughts around any collaborations or food justice initiatives that are, communities working in solidarity or aligning together or maybe even sharing land together in different, in Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon or anything like that. You're muted.
I think what's happening on the East Coast in Mi'kmaq territory today, where the Halifax chefs have said, we will not serve Atlantic lobsters in solidarity with the fishers there, the Indigenous fishers, is a really powerful principle of Indigenous food sovereignty acting in concert. We will not buy foods that are produced under a type of slave labor with no human rights, where workers are sent back to their country if they injure themselves so this government, this federal government and provincial, continues to violate human rights in the production of Canadian foods, and every Canadian should be aware that this is happening. And the other thing is, the supporting of local businesses like Black Creek, like farmers markets, etc. So there's an important principle of food sovereignty that we can practice with our purchases if we don't actually produce our own food. Very important that we support local just economies.
That's great. And do you think on a policy level, I mean, I know that you sit on the policy board. At a policy level, could you maybe speak to that? That'd be great.
Absolutely. That policy is a really important thing that, the transparency, how are policies made, how are they followed, are often in Canadian and provincial governments not abiding by community norms or community, responding to community needs. And that is a practical lesson in civics that we all need to learn from a very early age. The decisions that are being made in our backyards must be approved by us, particularly the people who hold communities up like a lot of women do. So the Canadian government, I don't know how many times we've met with the Minister of Agriculture to tell him our stories. And, people that work at universities, people working on food policies, and still they don't listen. And I think that as long as they don't listen, we need to be threatening them with turfing them out and, hiring or bringing in people who will listen because they're intransigent. So policy is very powerful. And there are small groups of people working to ensure that policy respects local needs. So thank you for bringing that up, that it's important to be practicing, but it's also important to be planning down the road through solid policy and research.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Priscilla, I have a quick question for you in regards to, so for one, there is the national food policy that was announced, I believe last year. I wanted to know if you had any thoughts in regards to that move by the federal government. And also if you can touch a little bit around the human rights violations that you mentioned that the federal and provincial government is doing right now.
Well, it's one thing to have policy, but the whole other thing, it comes out in the wash in the practice. So for example, the federal government continues to subsidize huge corporate farms. And, farmers markets don't receive that same subsidization. We've had northern subsidy pots of money that go to subsidize the northern stores as opposed to local stores. These northern stores are very powerful and they have squeezed out any attempt at local stores. And meanwhile, their prices are like huge, skyrocketing, and yet they get more money from the federal government. So policies are only as good as if they're being held in place and not secretively putting pots of money into corporate, production of food systems. Justice is a really important one that every year I have the occasion to hear from, I forget which group it is out of Ontario. Maybe you can help me, Amma. And their lawyer, they have a lawyer who takes on a lot of the human rights abuses. And I'm just blown away by the human rights abuses that the producers, like the small farmers, are subjected to just so to produce food for us. So each of us who consumes foods that we don't grow, we need to ask where and what conditions were those food produced under, and am I going to continue to buy them? And it's hard because it's not very transparent. So yes, food justice has to be right at the center of this discussion that we're doing.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think to add to it too, I think it is important for people to support local producers and local growers, but it's also very important for people to have an understanding of the policies and of the bigger picture issues that surrounds the issue so that they can also vote or speak to some of the bigger policy pieces that you're talking about to really make sure that we can have a big systemic change. Because sometimes what happens a lot with the local food movement is that people feel, well, I've done my part. I went to the farmer's market and I got my potatoes from that. So I've done my part. But I think it's very important that people understand the big political pieces, like for instance, the fisheries and the lobster piece that came out as well, and some people really taking tangible steps of really saying, I am not going to put lobster on the menu in support of Indigenous fisheries. I think it's bold, and it's really, really important to really get to some of the core of the issue as well.
Yes, and I think too, we need to examine Canada's international policies and its impact on so-called developing countries, where some of the structural adjustment programs that so-called developing countries are forced to accept from our developed countries are the imposition of genetically modified seeds. Like, where's the justice in that? They think we're stupid. They think that we don't know what impositions they're giving to developing regions just in order to get loans that are payable back. So, you know, these are stories that things like the Attic Land Declaration on Food Sovereignty addresses. It addresses the whole developmental model framework that keeps people on their knees, keeps people in poverty from a very high level. It's quite sinister when we look at the continuing role of colonialism and imperialism now in other regions of the world, where we have a lot through our international free trade agreements. We have a huge impact on women's work throughout the world and small farmers. And I would suggest people become very familiar with the impact of these free trade agreements in much the same way that Indigenous peoples have in developing these declarations, these food sovereignty declarations.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. That's, wow, that's great. So many things to think about, and so many, I really love that you've covered the points of industry plus policy. And I think I have a question, but there are some questions in the chat. So maybe since we're on the food policy, a bit of a food policy subject here, I could ask Arlette Martinez's question. Arlette, do you want me to read it, or would you like to just ask it yourself?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I could ask it myself. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Priscilla, I had a question for you specifically. You were talking about the food policy for Canada that Amma also asked. Specifically, point number 4, or the policy published in 2019, is developing food systems and strengthening food systems within Indigenous communities in Canada. But it seems that the only thing they've done so far is put Three Sisters soup in the recipes from the food guide. Do you have any more comments about that? Thank you.
Great question.
I do. I'm glad you asked that, because we have hundreds of outstanding land claims in Canada that were agreed to when Canada was made a nation. And so while these outstanding land claims exist, whereby every man, woman, and child is entitled to land, our government continues to allow huge land grabs to foreign purchasers. So we've got big chunks of land in Saskatchewan that are being sold to international corporations, and the government is not settling rapidly or adequately the land claims of my First Nations peoples. So that's one. But even in a practical sense, you know, meanwhile, while these land claims aren't being settled, the land is being destroyed very rapidly through clear cuts, through mines, through dams, deforestation, toxic dump sites, military bases. So all of these things continue, and people live in the highest rate of unemployment and hopelessness. Like, we have upwards of 80–90% unemployment. And the thing that gets my gall is that the government purposefully continues that practice of just not dealing with the high rates of unemployment. And a result of that is the obscene racism that exists or develops and blaming people who are 90% unemployed for being lazy or being drunk or being child batterers, you name it. We've heard all the stories about how our people have been targeted by very racist statements. And, you know, feel free to murder and disappear our women and murder our youth and ignore our, you know, horrible cases of teen suicide. Like, when's it going to stop? When are the genocidal practices of Canada gonna effing stop? I'm so tired of it. You know, it's a good thing I'm about to retire because I think I'm gonna punch out somebody. You know, it is really very soul destroying. And so I urge everybody, every Canadian, to stand up, to be heard, and to vote, and to really hold our politicians accountable, because we don't have time. The natural world is sinking. Families are busted. Communities are, instead of analyzing, you know, in a very clear, coherent way, are choosing to become racists and destroy our communities, like what is happening on the coast of Mi'kmaq territory. Yeah.
Yes, those, yeah, the violence, the fires, the degradation, it's really upsetting what's happening on the East Coast. I urge everyone to look at it. If you don't know what we're referring to look into what's happening for Mi'kmaq fishers on the West Coast for their efforts to for a moderate livelihood. The words that keep coming across, and I think you're pointing really well, like what you said, Priscilla, points to what we can do, and that we can do something, you know, on our, from an individual level or our community level. And I think that maybe I'll ask a question from the chat again, another question. This one's for Amma, and it has to do with you know, what's happening in at the farm and the gardens and growing. It's from Dare and Arrow. Can you speak to your Dare Arrow? Can you speak to your experience, Amma, in trying to scale? You don't mind me asking it for you there, Dare? Is it okay? Okay. Can you speak to your experience in trying to scale up your farm or the farm without perpetuating the helper/helped divide? Or if relevant, how you push back against the pressures from funders about how you should develop your work at Black Creek Community Farm. And Dare, if you want to clarify at all, or if you have you need clarification, Amma, Dare is here too.
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, here. It's just that often, you know, this happens like from the very beginning, like if you get a scholarship or whatever, you always have to pay, like they expect this future ongoing, like, co-signing of everything, you know, like I've had a lot of, oh, you'd be great. And I'm like, yeah, I know, you want a picture of this hair on your website, like yada, yada. But it's like, as you go on and you're starting to develop a new farm and new programs, I have all these people who are offering to help me, you know, but it's not actually a gift, you know, like these aren't gifts. These are like,
It never is.
where they haven't spelled out all the terms. And even with granting and stuff, it's like how much of our development as people is dictated by these folks, because they're picking who gets the grant money, and they put out their qualifications, right? They're like, this is what we think that Indigenous groups need to focus on. So now you pitch to us. So you have to make your project fit their thing on paper. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, I'm just tired of it. I'm not interested. And it's like, so how do you set those boundaries where you're like, okay, you are welcome to walk with us in this, but this is what's up. This is the line. And, you know.
Yeah, it's as a non-for-profit, it's been pretty difficult. So for an instance, when the farm was led by a white organization, sorry, 1 second, my battery is about to die. I forgot to plug it in. So when the farm was led by a white person, the budget or the revenue for the farm was over $1 million. When the farm is led by dominantly racialized and Black women, myself, we are looking at $600,000. That's our annual budget. Right? So it speaks to a lot as well in terms of who funds who and why that happens. It's been pretty interesting and challenging at times trying to find the right funder for the programs and services that we want to run for our community. So I'll give you an example. We have a youth internship program. One of the things that we have been very clear is that we want to make sure that youth that are part of our program get paid for their training and that it's not free. Even though we're offering workshops, they should never be free. They also have families and it's also their labor and that needs to be compensated. And that's been very difficult to find the right funder that will understand that the youth need to be paid and that the training is not just the one outcome of that program. So have we been able to run the program right now? No. Last year, we weren't able to run the program because we didn't have the resources to do that. And we're trying not to duplicate sort of the current food system, sort of what that looks like. We want to make sure that people can get paid for their work and to be able to do that. So I think it's an ongoing process with us trying to figure out who we get money from. Like someone said, you want money from Coca-Cola, they have lots of money and they'll be willing to give it to you. But that's not the type of work that we're involved. And actually that's an organization that we're against and don't want to partner with and don't want to work with. So I think part of what we're trying to build is our own systems and our own ways to be able to generate our own money so that we're able to decide on what to do with it than being tied to funders. Because instead of doing the work, you end up spending a lot of your time just doing reports and doing what they need you to do, right? So
what they need you to do so that they can get paid, right?
Exactly.
That's right.
So it's really, I think, is for us to, this is why I like our folks in down south. They are not saturated by a lot of non-for-profit. A lot of the work is around really developing their own co-op models, collective models, and pooling money, whether they're doing susu or sharecropping, whatever that may be able to kind of work together and to have that autonomy for themselves so that they can do the real work.
I think this is a really amazing question. Thanks so much for that, because it brings up a few other organizations that are happening around Toronto, and one that I would really like to mention because one of their founders worked very closely with Finding Flowers, Jacqueline Dwyer, and the Black Farmers Collective, who do a lot of work that is not tied to the agenda of funders, and very, community-based. It's a collective of activists and food growers, and so I've learned a lot by working with Jacqueline, and even learned about that kind of being tethered to the funder, and that can be really supportive, but it can also, as you both have talked about, it takes away some autonomy. It takes away it adds this kind of public, or this kind of agenda on through their call for proposals and things like that. We have another question from the chat, so I'll turn it over to Karen Recollet. She's going to ask a question.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, Priscilla, I'm so happy to see you. So I have a question. I was thinking about the kinds of conversations we're having around funding, and I'm part of the High Park Indigenous Land Stewardship Circle. So we do some work on this and thinking about stewardship. And I'm wondering about some of the languages or vocabularies that might be helpful in order to change the power relationship. So I'm thinking about climate change and Waikotoan in relationship, and thinking about, well, maybe climate as relation, or changing the language so it's atmospherics. So that atmospherics might be a way of talking about these complex relationships between Black and Indigenous earth workers, Black and Indigenous thinkers and growers, and wondering if that might be a really important way to shift the conversation, so that we can look at, we can have a framework to look at environmental racism, look at the fire, looking at controlled burns, looking at fire as more than humankin, and then linking in conversations around justice issues. So I guess my question would be, if those types of languages that would be helpful in terms of exploring the relationships between Black and Indigenous, like radical relationships with earth and with land, and if that can perhaps bring in some ideas about cosmologies and knowledge systems of the stars, for example, and some of those incredible relationships between Indigenous cosmologies and, you know, thinking about African, the diasporic, Caribbean cosmologies that might be helpful.
I just love the way you think always.
Yeah, I knew I couldn't answer that. I couldn't ask that question the same way.
I mean, your work, Karen, really speaks to getting out of the box and looking at traditional Indigenous female or woman-centered frames of reference, I guess. And it's so refreshing to coming out of the boxes that we work in and to use our audience or our workplace as a methodology, like a place where we can do those kind of wordsmithing. But it's even more than just wordsmithing. It's actually worldview, and something that I have been trying to do as a scholar for decades in the academy and in honoring my community, our communities. So yes, I think that would be so tremendous to, you know, shift this thought, these actions, these worldviews onto one that is really honors our ancestors. Thank you for that, Amma.
Thank you.
I mean, just the fact that we're in this collective, Black and Brown, if you want to call it that, is really sort of tries to address that. And Amma and I have certainly always seen ourselves as linked together very strongly through our work at Seed Change, which is predominantly a non-Indigenous organization. But I think we've had these conversations there and they've been very productive. So yeah, I'll mute myself now.
I definitely agree, because our healing is very much tied together as Black and Brown folks. And the only way that we can liberate ourselves is by working together. And so, yeah, definitely I'm in agreement with Priscilla. And yeah, thank you for that great question. I think it's you know, one day at a time and trying to find ways that we can work closely together. When you think about police brutality in Indigenous communities and police brutality in Black communities, yeah, just ways that we can work together and rid ourselves of this evil.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that question, Karen. I knew I wouldn't do it justice, so I'm glad that you were willing to ask it and make this connection. And I think changing our perspective on the how we talk about or how we feel or how we refer to our relationship to land is really important. And just thinking even about what Amma, you were saying earlier about condo development and thinking about the land that is, you know, financialized in that way. And if we think about that being kind of the potential of that land connected to food, it really changes the way we might consider that, or for some people it might change it. You started touching on, and Karen's question connects to this somewhat. I was just wondering if you each would want to talk about a little bit, expand on how ancestral knowledge informs your work and your research, your work, or the way that you, that doesn't have to be bound to the institution, but like how, yeah, the work that you do and the way that you live, what sort of ancestral knowledge informs that. I don't know who would want to maybe go first. And if you want to mention a particular food that mediates or nourishes that kind of relation, feel free. I always like to get a little food story in there somehow.
Oh, Priscilla, you want to go first?
Well, I'll go first. I think that when I mentioned the valuing of our communities, like the Ohkotowin, which Karen mentioned, and Bimatsawin, the worldview of seeing everything through a framework of the good life, not that life is perfect, no, but just really bringing back the values that centered in our communities. And like, not to say we had a monopoly on it, although tribal people generally were more in tune with their surroundings because you really had to pay attention. Otherwise you would die if you weren't really on top of the minutia, like the changes that happened in community. But you know, this province of Saskatchewan, when it became a province and settlers came and started farming and doing, you know, whatever they did to contribute to the economy, they very much relied on the principle of cooperation. And so we have great systems of cooperative valuing coming out of Saskatchewan, like Medicare. Like Medicare was developed in this province by groups of caring doctors, medical doctors, that put their lives on the line, challenging other for-profit kinds of medical workers. And I know because I grew up during that time and saw the impact on some of the doctors who said, no, we believe that this province, we need medical care free so that nobody suffers. And so they put their lives on the line. Similarly, for the way farms were first established in this province, cooperatively, each farmer helping each farmer. And it wasn't just white farmers, it was Indigenous farmers who helped and helped them to understand the local biospheres and lands and that. And so this province was built on a very strong ethic of cooperation. But today, we're losing that, or we've lost it. We've lost, the family farm is all but destroyed. There's very few family farms left in the province. It's all corporate farms. Well, we know that these large businesses are not accountable to the people who took care of the land. So, you know, it's a bigger picture of this story of globalization that we're all subjected to. And in order to change it, we must understand it deeply, how these governance structures kick the life out of people and land. And that's what I find is happening globally with my international brothers and sisters in their fight back strategy, that they understand deeply the impact of globalization and work against it and know that it's going to topple if we work collectively, like it's collectives, like many of our communities were based on. And, you know, legislation did everything to destroy those carrying capacities. The Indian Act was very much a pyramid style, is a pyramid style piece of legislation that puts women on the bottom, Indians on the bottom, animals aren't even anywhere in the equation. Land is certainly not, but it has a governance structure that is, you know, very capitalistic and very monopolistic. So we need to understand those kind of structures and how they work against our power and our soul. And certainly we do have the old models to go back to because we were built on them, and we must regain them, bring them back, and educate our communities about it. And, you know, I find that that has been just the big treasure of the food sovereignty movement, is that it goes back to dig out into our baggage about what was good about food and what was good about our communities. And my goodness, it's a global revolution now, this food sovereignty movement, and it's led by women, and they're very smart about who the power structures are that you're dealing with. So power, yeah, good power.
I can go. I wanted to share back this image because when I think of ancestral knowledge, I think of this clay grinder here. We call it ayua, or some Akandalites will call it apatoria. Whenever this is actually one that I purchased from a store in Toronto. Whenever I see this, I think of my grandmother, and I think of the different meals that she will prepare with this. And I also think of, you know, the 5 white gift, you know, and how it pertains to our health and our well-being. I always like using this and also using the frying pan as an analogy because when you look at Ghanaian foods and you look at the ways that our elders used to, and some do now, prepare foods, it's very healthy. And when I went to Ghana, my grandmother made soup. And the soup that she made was so different, much more rich, had spinach in there, like callaloo and some cocoyam leaves and things in there. And it was, and garden eggs, and it was very healthy and it was very rich. But when I make the same soup here in Canada, it's just literally tomatoes and onion and a lot of pepper and salt, right? That's pretty much it for the soup. I say this because, you know, this idea of being modernized and acquiring modernized things in our cuisine also has a huge impact in terms of our overall and mental and physical health. So if you have the apatoya, for an instance, we make this stew called kontomire. Kontomire was made basically using this ayua to make it. You just steam up your spinach a little bit, you just grind it up, add some pepper, tomatoes, maybe a little bit of peanuts, and you grind it and you boil yam or plantain and you eat it with it. Now, when you replace that with the frying pan, what you are basically doing is you are now adding oil and you're frying everything, your spinach, whatever, into that wine. It changes the food from an authentic sort of Ghanaian food to now this fried food that you eat that is not healthy for us. So if you follow along the lines of colonization and you look at a lot of racialized brown and Black communities, you will find high rates of diabetes, and you will find, you know, a lot of white sugar, white flour, like all the white gifts that were given to us, and the fact that a lot of things from our food systems have been removed. So I like this image when I think about ancestral knowledge and I think about my grandmother and her resistance to conform to this new way of cooking, a new way of doing things, is also inherently preserving Ghanaian cuisine and also taking care of her physical health as well. At the age, she's over 90 years old and much healthy in comparison to if you were to compare her to an average 90-year-old in this part of the world. And that's mainly because of that and her keeping that ancestral knowledge with her till this day. Thank you. I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks so much, Amma and Priscilla. We've come to our 5 o'clock mark. I want to thank you so much. Ending on that image, Amma, I really appreciate that that story that's connected to your grandmother, and that is in our present. You know, that is not something a long time ago. It is now really active and informs and inspires you. You made us hungry. I think you made us hungry, made me hungry for good food, but also food justice. So on that, I will I will just say, miigwech, thank you so much for your generosity of being here. A real pleasure to meet you, Priscilla and Amma. It's really nice to be connected again, and I'm looking forward to working with you more in the future. I want to just remind everybody that's tuning in that we have another Miijim Food as Relations next week. It'll be at 2:30, and it is learning from Minoman, and so that'll be our next episode, I guess we'll call it. So thanks so much. There's lots of thank you in the chat, and have a really good week, and do what you can and find out about what's happening on the East Coast. Speak out against anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism that's happening on the streets these days. And please stay safe during COVID. Stay safe. And that's all I have to say. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Dana, for having me. And thanks, Priscilla.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the speakers. Thank you everybody for joining us. We will be saving the chat for the speakers to have it if there were any other questions or greetings for them. And we will also be posting a recording of this conversation on our YouTube channel and Facebook page, so you can follow us there as well. Hope you have a wonderful night.
Oh, I forgot to say one thing. I know people are leaving, but if folks go on the Seed Change page on Facebook, there is actually a fundraiser for a seed, an Indigenous seed library in Tainega. They're trying to raise $35,000. They're just around 12,000. So if folks can really support, I'm actually going to put it right here. This is really to make sure that we can improve and build more resilience communities and seeds. And when we talk about food sovereignty, seeds is the key piece of that. So please help folks out. Thank you.
All right. Awesome way to end it. I don't want to leave. I want to stay here.